In the summer of 1942, although carrier air power had displaced the battleship as the dominant naval combat system, the U.S. Navy's need for its new fast battleships had not lessened. For the South Dakota-class battleships, which had no major teething problems, operational requirements accelerated their shakedown and training schedules, so much so that the first 3 ships all went into combat with only a half-year's workup. And sometimes the boundary between shakedown and combat blurred entirely. Today's episode of Battle Stars focuses on Battleship Massachusetts on D-Day for Operation Torch. On that Sunday, November 8, 1942, the crew of Big Mamie, as they nicknamed her, received their baptism of fire in the sparkling blue waters off Morocco. Putting in a good day's work, they gained invaluable on-the-job training and tasted both the old and new styles of naval warfare. Though commissioned only in May, Massachusetts was urgently needed for the invasion of French North Africa. Operation Torch aimed to strike the rear of the Africa Corps and begin clearing the Mediterranean basin for seaborne commerce. Not knowing how the crews of Vichy France's large warships, such as Battleship Richelieu, would respond, given their divided loyalties, planners wanted a fast battleship 16-inch guns on hand. The most significant element of Torch called for Rear Admiral Kent Hewitt's Task Force 34 to put ashore Major General George Patton's Western Task Force at 3 points on the Atlantic coast of Morocco. 35,000 troops were split among 3 attack groups. The center attack group was the largest. It would land at Flattop, near Casablanca, and its large French naval base. Set to smash any opposition was Rear Admiral Robert C. Giffin's covering group, built around Massachusetts and 2 heavy cruisers.
November the 8th, 1942. Orders of the day. The words "play ball" transmitted by the task force commanders signifies that all forces are to take vigorous and offensive action against the enemy. A large searchlight shown in a vertical position at night signifies that the enemy has agreed to the terms of the Allies.
For Massachusetts, D-Day unfolded in 3 phases. The first phase began when the crew went to general quarters at 05:45. The landings had already started. Aircraft gave the signal for French resistance, code word, "batter up." And at 06:30, Captain Francis Whiting ordered the battle flags raised. Hewitt's order to attack, "play ball," came 12 minutes later. Massachusetts was some 24,000 yards west of Casablanca. At 07:03, El Hank, which was a battery of 8 cruiser-sized guns defending the naval base, dropped 5 shells to starboard of Massachusetts. Whiting took the incomplete and immobile Richelieu-class battleship Jean Bart under fire 1 minute later, assuming the shell splashes were the work of 15-inch guns. Massachusetts struck the French battleship 5 times. The final hit, a ricochet that didn't explode, silenced the battleship's only working turret by jamming it in train. Meanwhile, Massachusetts wreaked havoc ashore. Her shells blasted a destroyer that capsized against the quay and helped to sink 4 merchant ships. Aircraft from the center group's carrier, Ranger, were likewise preoccupied. After some 90 minutes, Massachusetts ceased firing, because the blast and shock of 47 salvos had disabled all her radars. El Hank scored a hit on her main gaff, putting a hole in Big Mamie's battle ensign. The second phase of Big Mamie's first fight arose from the novelty and intensity created by the first. Historian Samuel Eliot Morison, who was on board the light cruiser Brooklyn in the center group screening force, later alleged that the covering group had become so interested in pounding Jean Bart and El Hank that it neglected to contain the other French warships. As a result, 7 French destroyers had sortied from Casablanca and lit out at high speed to attack the landing beach at Flattop, only 12 miles up the coast. While aircraft from Ranger bombed and strafed them, only the intercession of Hewitt's flagship, heavy cruiser Augusta, Brooklyn, and 3 destroyers, all with guns at rapid fire, forced the enemy, then only 4 miles from the landing beach, to turn away and make smoke. At 0900, when Hewitt ordered Giffen to take care of them, the second phase began. Giffin's heavy cavalry charged onto the scene at 27 knots. Starting at 0918, a torrent of 16 and 8-inch shells fell around the French destroyers. Hitting those whippets, Morison said, was like trying to hit a grasshopper with a rock. Soon, though, destroyer Fugo exploded and sank. After some 20 minutes of firing, Whiting checked fire because the main battery had again knocked her radar offline. The melee reached its crescendo between 10 and 1100. L. Hank had straddled Massachusetts at 0943, and 17 minutes later struck her port side between turrets 1 and 2. The shell penetrated the deck armor, exploded below, starting a small fire. At the same time, the light cruiser Primo Gay, with 8 6-inch guns and 12 torpedo tubes, arrived on the scene. She was attempting to support 2 destroyers that had rashly left the relative safety of their smokescreen to attack the covering group. Overhead, dive bombers from Ranger had also returned, and to make the day especially memorable, the water was full of submarine-launched torpedoes. At 10:05, Whiting turned Massachusetts into a spread of 4 French fish. 3 torpedoes passed to port, but Big Mamie barely eluded the 4th, which passed down the starboard side with only 15 feet to spare. The third phase for Massachusetts began at about 10:30, when after avoiding torpedoes, she re-entered the battle. French forces fought valiantly against the center group's screen and the covering group, but by 1100, their luck was running out as fast as Massachusetts was emptying her magazine. At 11:04, Whiting reported that he had expended 59.2% of his 16-inch shells. He began to conserve ammunition in case Richelieu appeared. After a failed torpedo attack at 11:15, one by one the surviving destroyers limped away. Only one returned to port undamaged.
Meantime, at Algiers, our landing craft also met fire from shore batteries, which were soon silenced by ships of the British Navy. Here, too, the French troops ashore were asked by radio to indicate a friendly attitude by throwing their searchlight beams vertical. It wasn't long before, here and there along the coast, searchlights were seen pointing to the heavens.
The French had suffered 4 destroyers sunk, Jean Bart disabled, light cruiser Primo Gay heavily damaged, burned out and aground. 2 destroyer leaders were damaged and had run aground as well. Massachusetts fired 786 16-inch shells in 134 salvos during the engagement. Her 5-inch guns fired 221 rounds. In several hours on D-Day, while technically on her shakedown cruise, the new battleship not only had the unique old-world experience of fighting ships and fortresses, but also the more modern thrill of surviving submarine and aircraft attack. There were no casualties among her crew. After a ceasefire had been arranged with the French, Massachusetts departed on November 12th for the United States for a thorough overhaul and to prepare for duty in the Pacific. As a postscript, the crew of Richelieu chose sides. In February 1943, Jean Bart's sister ship was heartily welcomed in New York City and entered the Brooklyn Navy Yard for overhaul.